Well, let's continue. When union and moment where left here. When union and employer bargain, they can set a price wage level, allowing employer to employ as many people as possible, or they can set both employment and wage level. If you remember, when just wage level set, we are not reaching to the Pareto optimum point. When wage and employment level are set together with the union and the employer, then a higher um, utility level can be reached both by union and the employer. Um, while the union prefers any point where either employment or wage level increases, while employer prefers to reduce wage to the minimum possible point, but at each wage level there is a particular employment where employer's profit is maximum. Um, and As in original Edgewood box, relative gains from the trade union and employer depends on their relative bargaining power. As long as both union and employer are able to benefit from a particular modification, they will make that modification, which means their final point they arrive will be a point where any modification that creates mutual benefit is impossible. So they will arrive to a Pareto optimum point, basically. Of course, as long as they can recognize Pareto improvements in their situation. This is already what I have told. When only wages set, collective bargaining, employer choose for each wage level, profit maximizing employment level. When both wage and employment level is set collectively by collective bargaining, both employer and union might get a better point if union agrees to reduction in wage in return for higher employment level, and employer accept to keep employment level above the profit maximizing level for that wage level. Bargaining power of each agent typically depends on potential loss of the other agent when it disagrees with the other agent, relative to the case when it agrees to meet all the demands. Strikes are typical occasions where each agent tests each other's bargaining power. If both have high bargaining power, strikes typically last long. If in the end, however, wage offered by employer and demanded by the union get closer to each other and both wage levels get equal, then the strike ends. Pretty much summarizing, all we have said up to this point. Note the bargaining power of union is typically higher when an employer is likely to lose much from the strike. So it might depends on situation, basically. So not working, not having their workers to work should hit them really hard, basically. For example, typically a union is more likely to harm employer if they can either can damage production process and make inputs or semi-finished inputs to perish. For example, farm workers. For the farm workers, right before the harvest is the right time to strike. Why? Because if you don't make the harvest, then basically the plants will perish, and in a few weeks maybe you won't be able to harvest them anymore. Alternatively, for service workers, there are periods when you have high demand, and those are the periods when you need to have workers work. I mean, if the workers just make strike before this high demand periods, then the company is hit hardest. Well, similarly for the production companies also, I mean, there are certain periods when you have high level of orders and your inventories are decreasing. I mean, you don't have enough. The products you have already stored are getting less and less and less. And at that time, if your workers strike, you might be harmed a lot because you might not have enough products to sell exactly at the point when those products are high in demand, and you might lose your market share as a result. So that's one point. When demand is already low, or when basically there's no need for production because of the seasonality of the work, I mean, it's not the right time to strike, and those strikes are usually end up without gaining anything for the workers, without any additional gain get by the union. And you might now look to the another use of the union model. Basically, we might discuss union power of the skilled and unskilled workers, and well, basically, we might say, well, skilled workers also, in some cases, might have unions. Certainly, Dawson and Campusen are, I mean, they are bringing skilled workers together, both academic workers, but part of the non-academic workers in those unions are also skilled. Doctors are, for example, in that union, and you might also have chambers and other organizations that represent some professions of the skilled workers. For example, Chamber of Architects in Turkey famously has been very active. However, skilled workers are usually taught to have more wage differentials. I mean, some of them might be really good and get high level of wages. That's one thing, I mean, which makes bargaining collectively for different, I mean, for doctors might be difficult. I mean, some might be just able to get a higher wage. Well, it might be possible to set certain performance criteria, and that performance criteria might be actually setting certain levels of wages for different type of productivity by the skilled workers. But still, I mean, there might be some additional difficulty for the skilled workers. And the skilled workers also, to some extent, might have higher bargaining power and better options to get also to get a new job, basically. And that might also decrease his or her demand for a union. Well, this might have been true, especially in 1950s and 60s, where the number of educated labor force was small. Nowadays, I mean, maybe the percentage of skilled workforce is increasing, and maybe union for skilled labor force, possible union for a skilled labor force, a profession, or organizing skilled labor force in workplaces, the possible organization of it might be increasing, maybe, and also maybe, especially, majority of the people within a profession. I mean, in many cases, they might also not have that high of a wage differential. In some cases, they might, but in many cases, for majority of them, wage differential might not be that great. I mean, the amount that's paid to them for many academicians might be on comparable scales. Same might be more or less true for them. Well, teachers at least. I don't know. Some engineers might get a very high amount, but also for a significant percentage of engineers, this might also be true. So for a significant percentage of doctors, this might also be true. Although in both professions there are some high wage earners. So there might be some ground for skilled unions for skilled workforce, but for the unskilled workforce, the conditions are, I mean, much more favorable because the wage differences there are much smaller, as well as their ability to bargain is also very low. I mean, usually they accept the conditions that are offered to them. Even skilled workforce is not, I mean, not bargaining, but maybe comparing different options if he or she is able to, the skilled worker can get multiple offers. Maybe he or she might compare them and get the job with better offer, basically. So that's basically how we might basically tell on the correct, I mean, potential unionism between skilled and unskilled workers. And since, I mean, unskilled workers are more likely to unionize, when unions are powerful, the wage differences between them, skilled and unskilled workers also tend to be low. Now, well, we might use this fact as one reason why the wage differences between skilled and unskilled workforce in the United States starts to increase. There are other explanations to that, and actually, that factor is certainly not bounded by to one thing, but one reason certainly, I mean, bargaining power of the unskilled workforce is getting very low. Bargaining power of skilled workforce is not necessarily increasing, but uh, certainly bargaining power of unskilled workforce is getting lower and lower, especially the international labor force is also potentially able to replace them. And lack of unionism or desperateness of unionism to combat with this decrease of bargaining power might be a reason of that. And as a result, the union membership in the United States is also going down. Although recently, as I said, unions have some important victories in the United States. So, unionism in the United States. I pretty much want to focus on the United States, although there are some other countries, data from some other countries as well. But I still think, I mean, United States is an important case to look at. Well, we have a number called union density, which is called percentage of workers who are part of the union in a country. And then there's union coverage. As I said before, unions sometimes may be able to make a collective bargaining process for their non-members, or for people who are not member of the union also. For example, as I said, if 50% of the people select union as representative, even if I'm not member of the union, and if I'm working in that workplace, the bargaining is also done for me, basically. So union coverage might be not necessarily the same as the union density. And in some cases, it might be lower, which might mean some unions might not be making collective bargaining process. They might be helping their members in different ways. This is the union membership in the United States. Percentage of workforce might be more interesting to look at. From 1930s on, you can see the number has increased all the way to 25. 25 is, I believe, was the highest number. After 1950s, as you see, the numbers start to decline all the way to 9.6. You can look to what happened to after that year. It declined further, basically. So these are, and you can look to these numbers also, but this is just mid-9, 2006, 7, basically. And you can see union density and union coverage. For example, in Argentina, density is 37.6, but coverage is 60%, which means, a lot of workers who are not union member are covered by the collective bargaining process. So we'll continue in the next part.